Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the May 13th, 2024 workshop of the Orlando City Council. So we've got a couple workshops today. First up will be a report from the recently concluded legislative session, and then we will have an update on our building, energy, and water efficiency program from our Office of Sustainability and Resilience. So Kyle, you want to start us out?
Legislative Affairs and Intergovernmental Relations here at the City of Orlando. I'm going to give you a quick legislative update from the past session that concluded just recently. As you know, we've got about 30 minutes here. There is no way you can get through all the bills and all the stuff that happened in Tallahassee in 30 minutes. So this is a bit of an overview. Am I on? Am I on? There we go. Okay. In front of you, you should have this presentation that I'm giving you, but also you should have the annual legislative report from the Florida League of Cities as well that will go into more depth on the bills that I talked about and some other bills. As always, if you have questions about any of these bills, please get with me, and we'll spend time in your office going through them a little more thoroughly. We can bring our legislative team down to your office as well to talk about them. By the way, my annual disclaimer, remember here, I'm just the messenger for a lot of this stuff, okay? So just keep that in mind. With us today, we have a team of consultants that help us in Tallahassee to make sure that our interests are being protected up in Tallahassee, and that includes the Pittman Law Group, Sean Pittman with the Pittman Law Group. Sean is based out of Tallahassee. I asked him not to drive all the way here for a 30-minute overview. From the Southern Group, we have Oscar Anderson. Oscar is here. Courtney James, Chris Dudley, who is also based out of Tallahassee, and Kaylee Slatery, who is here as well. And from our Gray Robinson team, we have former Speaker of the Florida House, Dean Cannon, Chris Carmody, Robert Stewart Jr., Ryan Matthews, and Angela Jawecki. Okay, first a quick session overview. There were 6 interim committee weeks this year that started back in the fall. There's actually 7. The House and the Senate had their first weeks in 2 different weeks. The regular session started early this year because it's an election year. So January 9th through March 8th, and the legislative session concluded on time this year. This year there were 1,957 bills that were filed. All of those are bills that your team went through to make sure that they did not have, or we were able to mitigate whatever impact it had on the City of Orlando. There were more than 3,000 different texts filed, and that includes bills, proposed committee bills, and amendments made to bills. Almost 3,000 amendments were filed, and over 3,000 votes were taken in committees and on the House floor. Of those 1,957 bills, 325 of them passed through both chambers this year, a little higher than normal, not as high as last session, but a little bit higher than the historic average. Out of the 1,900 bills that were filed, the City of Orlando, by the end of the session, we were tracking about 300 of those bills, 300 of them having some direct or indirect impact on city business. Now, out of the total number of bills that are filed, the League of Cities will tell you that probably about 400 or 500 of those bills have some impact on local government in some way. But we were tracking 302 of them by the end of session. Out of the 325 bills that passed through both houses of the legislature, 82 of those were within our tracked bill list. So there were 82 bills that passed that have some direct or indirect, light or heavy impact on the City of Orlando. And I'm going to go over some of those here in just a moment. So here's sort of a historic breakdown of bills. You can see that the legislature, again, 1,957 bills, higher percentage than usual passed. I think it was over, what is that? More than usual, 10%, more than 10% passed, 325. Remember that big dip in the number of bills that are filed over the last couple of years has nothing to do with productivity from the legislature. It's that individual appropriation bills are filed in the House as standalone bills. That's just a rule change. But in terms of substantive bills, pretty typical year. Okay, let's jump into some of the bills that impact us the most. Building regulations, HB 267. There has been an effort over the last number of sessions in the state legislature to try to speed up the issuance of building permits at the local level. And there's been this narrative out there that some local governments, not all, some local governments are simply too slow at reviewing building plans and getting permits out the door, doing inspections, getting buildings open. And the narrative is that that contributes in some way to the lack of enough housing here in the state of Florida. So the legislature has, over the last few years, toyed with shot clocks or timeframes in which local governments have to review plans for permits. So there was a change this year, and this bill is in front of the governor right now. He must act on it by May 22nd, just in a week or so. And I would fully expect him to sign this into law. It requires, for some types of building permits, that the city review those permits and issue them for smaller buildings, buildings under 7,500 square feet, within 30 days. Before, the shot clock was 120 days. For larger buildings, it is 60 days, and it was 120 days. It also requires local governments, the building department, to review those applications that come in for completeness and then report back to the applicant whether or not the application is complete or not within 5 days. There is in this bill an exception if the local government is not able to review those applications in a timely manner. There is a provision that requires us to reduce the fee for the building permit application. There is now an exception in there that says, hey, if it's the applicant's fault that there is a delay in the review time, that there is not a fee reduction. So that is a piece of good news in this bill. This bill also tells the Florida Building Commission that they are to come up with rules that allow the submission of applications for replacement windows, replacement doors, and some replacement garage doors without signed and sealed drawings. Again, this bill, there's some other things in there. There's an item in there that makes it easier for someone to get certified to become a plans reviewer or building inspector. And so that should ideally help in our recruitment of people to work in that industry. Vacation rentals, SB 280. This bill has not been presented to the governor yet. But as you know, for many, many years, the legislature has tried to do something in the area of vacation rentals. Largely at the prodding of a lot of coastal communities, smaller coastal communities that in their mind have been overrun by vacation rentals in residential neighborhoods. Also at the behest of the industry that thinks that some local governments are too heavy-handed in their regulations of vacation rentals. Here's the upshot for us. Something finally passed. A bill passed this year. It passed at the very, very end of session, and it was much contested. It did not pass along party lines. It split Democrats and Republicans and people from all over the state. But here's the upshot for us. The current law says that local governments are prohibited from banning vacation rentals or regulating their duration or frequency. So that has been on the books for a number of years. But it also grandfathers in ordinances, local ordinances, that were in effect before 2011. Well, we're one of those local governments. We had an ordinance on the books before 2011. Didn't use the term vacation rentals. That's a newer term. We called them commercial dwelling units, but it effectively banned them in most residential neighborhoods. This bill continues that grandfather. So the most important thing for us was to maintain that grandfather status, and we still have it. One thing that was added to the bill that actually gives a little flexibility to us, to the city, is that you can maintain that grandfathered status even if you loosen your ordinance. So if you decided that, for whatever reason, that you wanted to loosen the way that we regulate vacation rentals, you could adopt a new ordinance without losing the grandfather status of your ordinance. This bill also, though, clearly preempts the licensing, not the registration, the licensing of vacation rentals and the advertising platforms. So those online platforms that you go to rent out a vacation rental, those things can't be regulated at the local level. Those are now going to be regulated by the Division of Hotels and Restaurants, just like they issue licenses for hotels and restaurants. So vacation rentals have been put into a licensing scheme under the DPBR. But the good news is that local governments may require local registration of vacation rentals, and this was one of the more contested parts of this bill. We can charge a reasonable fee for registration and for inspections, and we may make specified inspections of the vacation rental for consistency with life safety codes, building codes, et cetera. We may even impose fines and suspend the registration for certain violations. The bill also says that vacation rentals have to make sure they pay all their taxes to the county, their taxes to the state, and also the local business tax to us. The bill goes on to enhance the regulatory authority of the Division of Hotel and Restaurants over vacation rentals. This is one of those bills, we don't know what's going to happen to it. Maybe it's vetoed, maybe it's not. People on both sides of the aisle are unhappy in some ways with this, which may mean it's a happy compromise. Who knows? We'll see. But the bottom line is, if it's signed into law, no real immediate change to us. The city attorney's office is looking into one thing. It is possible that our registration system that we have now may have to be readopted to be consistent with the registration system that is allowed in this bill. It won't call for a lot of changes, but TBD on that. You remember last session, one of the big bills was the Live Local Act. The Live Local Act was designed to encourage the building of affordable housing and also to incentivize through various state incentive programs the building of affordable housing. There was, as predicted, a glitch bill. Whenever you have a big bill like the Live Local Act, there's little things that you sort of don't notice maybe during the heat of legislative session, but after you sort of operationalize these things at the local level, you notice that there's a few little nits. So 328, again, it's in front of the governor. He has to act on it by May 22nd. It amends various provisions of the Live Local Act, and the ones that I think we're most concerned with or most interested in is that zoning bypass. So you remember that in the Live Local Act, as an effort to incentivize affordable housing, developers, builders could come to a city and basically bypass many of your zoning laws, things like density, intensity, height, etc., if they laid aside 40% of the units in that new development for affordable housing for at least 30 years, okay? The developer was allowed to build at the highest density and intensity allowed anywhere in the jurisdiction, and was allowed to build as tall as the tallest building within a certain distance. I believe it was a mile, if I remember correctly. There are a few things that were clarified in here that we thought we knew but weren't certain. One thing, for example, is a lot of cities like ours, we have density bonus programs. Well, when you say at the highest density, someone can build at the highest density allowed under your code, what do they mean? Under the base code or under a density bonus system? We thought it was probably the base code, but this was clarified to say that it's under the highest allowed density before a density bonus. Doesn't mean you can't give a density bonus if you also choose to, but that's left up to the locals. The other thing that is in here that is good, and it's very confusing, you'll have to get Elizabeth to explain this to you because it's very complicated. But remember I told you that developers could build to the tallest, they could build their building as tall as the tallest building within a mile. Well, near some residential neighborhoods, there is now a provision that allows us to more carefully regulate the height to be more compatible with the residential neighborhood. So you won't necessarily be able to build to the tallest height of a building within a mile. You have to build a little more compatible with the nearby residential neighborhood. The way that that is calculated is very, very complicated, and I challenge the planners to try to figure that out. But it does give more latitude to this board and to the planners to regulate the height of buildings near residential neighborhoods. This bill also requires that the administrative approval that goes with the zoning bypass, that the local government has to come up with policies and procedures to lay out exactly how that administrative process works, okay? So you will find here pretty soon the city attorney's office and the planning office coming to you with a proposed policy and procedure to show how we will process those applications if and when they come in. Another provision from last year said that, hey, if a building, if that goes through the zoning bypass is within a certain distance of a major transit hub, you, local government, should consider reducing the minimum parking requirements. That was just an option you should consider. The law now says that if you're within a certain distance of a transit hub with things like light rail, bus rapid transit, a bus hub or something, that you have to reduce the requirements, the minimum parking requirements by at least 20%. Finally, and this actually has some profound impact on the city of Orlando, people noted that in a lot of cities you have airports near your center city. We have, the Orlando International Airport and then also the Executive Airport. And around those airports are airport hazard areas where buildings cannot go because they are near the flight path in and out of an airport. And there are also noise overlays. This bill exempts all those areas that have an airport noise overlay, which is a considerable amount of the city of Orlando, particularly on the east side of the city near the Orlando International Airport. And any area in an airport hazard area, it exempts that from the zoning bypass. So there is now a considerable part of the city of Orlando where the zoning bypass is no longer eligible if this bill is signed into law. Okay, next, employment regulations, HB 433, and this has been approved by the governor already. You've probably heard about this. It preempts local regulation of workplace heat exposure standards. So the federal government, OSHA, is working on rules related to workplace safety and heat. And the state has said local governments stay out of that, let OSHA do it. But this bill goes further. It preempts local living wage and employment benefits policies for city vendors, whether or not the project is funded with local or state money. And it also preempts local regulation of employee work scheduling. So things like predictive scheduling, which has been an ordinance that has been adopted by local governments in different parts of the United States. Local governments are now preempted from regulating private workplaces in that regard and are vendors in that regard as well. HB 601, law enforcement and correctional officers. This is the bill that impacts us directly at the city of Orlando. This bill expresses the legislative intent that the process for receiving and reviewing disciplinary cases for law enforcement officers apply the same across the state throughout all the subdivisions of the state. This bill was designed to originally, in its original form, to do away, to ban, to preempt all police review boards. We have a Citizens Police Review Board. We've had one since back in the 1990s. This bill originally wholesale just banned them from existing, no matter what they did or didn't do. What the bill says at the end is that a political subdivision, like a city, may not adopt or enforce an ordinance relating to the receipt or processing of complaints of misconduct by law enforcement officers, except as provided in the Police Bill of Rights. A civilian oversight of law enforcement agencies and complaints of misconduct by LEOs cannot be reviewed by citizen oversight boards any longer. So originally it just wholesale banned them. Now it says that police review boards cannot review misconduct complaints either before the fact or after discipline has been implemented by the police chief. But the bill changed near the end at the request of cities for the better in a small way, and it allows the creation of civilian oversight boards that are appointed by the police chief, 3 to 7 members, with at least one of them being a former law enforcement official. That board may not review misconduct complaints against law enforcement officers, but they may review the policies and procedures of a police department. This bill has already been approved by the governor on April the 12th. In the next few weeks, you'll be hearing from the city attorney's office, who has a recommendation for you coming up on how or if we need to adopt an ordinance to make our ordinance comply with this new bill. So you'll be hearing from the city attorney on that here pretty soon. SB 812, expedited approval of residential building permits. This is not to be confused with the bill that implemented new shot clocks on the issuance of permits. This bill doesn't do a whole lot to the city of Orlando because we had a program much like this, but it requires local governments of a certain size to start a program whereby you issue building permits for individual homes before a final plat is done. So after a preliminary plat is approved by the local government, a developer can ask for and receive building permits for a certain percentage of the homes in a subdivision before the final plat is approved. We actually do this now in a way. We ask developers to sign a hold harmless agreement that holds us harmless from any mistakes the developer makes in receiving building permits before a subdivision plat is recorded. So we've done this for a number of years. It requires that, it says that we are not to issue any COs or temporary CFOs for any buildings before a final plat is approved. The applicant may not sell any of the homes before a final plat is approved. The applicant must also have a performance bond for 130% of the value, estimated value of all the public improvements that are shown on the preliminary plat. And the applicant, just like we do now in our program, must hold the city harmless for any damages. If they begin building, they get building permits, and they find that they have to move a road or move a utility, or a lot is out of place, all that economic damage that has been incurred by the developer is on the developer and not on the city. So not a big change, but something that we've been doing for a while that will be done statewide now. Status of that is that it's enrolled. It has not been delivered to the governor yet. Just a quick reminder, the legislature dribbles bills to the governor after session. There's no time frame other than the budget needing to be signed by July 1st. Once the governor receives a bill, it's presented to him or her, then they have 15 days to sign the bill. If they don't sign it, they can veto it. If they don't veto it and don't sign it, it just goes into law on its own accord. Mike asked if I was going to mention this bill, and I'm sorry, I have to. Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, this is a big bill, a department agency bill, and it really has one thing in it that pertains to us and is unfortunate. It is a preemption of the regulation of EV charging stations to the state. So as you know, the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services regulates gasoline pumps at gas stations, the old-fashioned gas stations. They now regulate EV charging stations as well. The initial question was, were they trying to preempt just the regulation of things like pricing and how big the price was, or the actual machine itself? And in fact, during testimony by the sponsor, we know that the intent behind this was to preempt local governments like ours that had an EV make-ready ordinance. So an ordinance that required conduit or other other equipment to be built along with a new development so that they would be ready for EV stations in the future. So again, you'll be hearing from the city attorney's office on exactly what we might need to do there in order to comply with that preemption. Here's a bill that you heard a lot about. It popped during the week that some of you were up for City Action Week in the legislative session. HB 1365, unauthorized public camping and public sleeping. You've heard all about this in the news. This bill prohibits city and county governments from authorizing or otherwise allowing any person to regularly engage in public camping or sleeping on any public property, and that includes public right-of-way. Counties may designate county-owned property to be used for a continuous period of no more than 1 year for the purposes of public camping or sleeping. In other words, to create a place for those without homes to camp. Those facilities, if it's optional, those facilities, if they are built by the county, must be certified and inspected by the Department of Children and Families. The counties may only do that if there is not adequate space in shelters in the county to house the homeless population of that county. And there are a variety of minimum safety, sanitation, and behavioral health service standards that have to be met at those facilities. Again, those are optional. One of the really worrisome things about the bill from a municipal perspective is that this bill gives certain individuals a cause of action to go to court to enjoin the city, to force the city to enforce anti-camping and anti-sleeping ordinances that are on the municipal code books. So the Attorney General of Florida, any resident of the county, or any business that is negatively impacted by a homeless encampment can bring an action against the city and receive attorney's fees if they are successful. There were some tweaks to this, as bad as this was. There were some tweaks to this that made it a little less bad. One of them is that the plaintiff now has to give us, the city, notice, at least 5 days notice, to cure the alleged violation. And there is at least some defense. The city can defend itself by saying that we've taken all reasonable action that we can to alleviate the encampment situation. That defense, so to speak, was not in the original bill. This bill was quickly approved by the governor back in March, not long after session concluded. Next is local government actions, SB 1628. You remember last year there was a bill that required local governments to perform a business impact statement for certain ordinances. So when you adopt certain ordinances, you would now have to perform a business impact statement, making our best guess estimate at what the regulatory cost on private business would be for an ordinance. One of the exclusions there, and there were a variety of exclusions, one of them was procurement ordinances, another was the budget ordinance, emergency ordinances, and a number of other ordinances. But one of the groups of ordinances that was exempt from that business impact statement was anything that implements Chapter 163 of the Florida statute. So land development code, land development regulations, comp plan amendments, development permits, et cetera. This bill changes that to say that if a land development regulation or a comp plan amendment is initiated by the city, so not initiated by a property owner, then a business impact statement now has to be done for those land development regulations. Okay. Next is a proposed constitutional amendment that would have an impact on us if adopted by 60% of the voters in this November's election. It's the annual adjustment to homestead adjustment value. So you know that there are two $25,000 exemptions on your property taxes that you don't pay property taxes on. The second $25,000 exemption, so for values between $50,000 and $75,000, if this were approved, would now be adjusted for inflation. So you take a CPI index that is laid out in the state statute, and you would peg that $25,000 exemption. So as inflation went up, if it continues to go up, the CPI indicator would fix that exemption. So one year, first year would be $25,000. The next year it might be $25,063 or whatever it is based on the rate of inflation. The Revenue Estimating Conference for the state believes that in year one, which would be next year, if it's adopted by the voters, this would have a $22.8 million statewide impact. That's across all local governments in the state of Florida. And we're talking about cities, counties, and special districts, not school boards, of course. Here's a good news bill. Mental health and substance abuse, HB 7021 by Representative Maney. This is a bill that sort of flew under the radar, but is a major overhaul of the state's Marchman and Baker Acts. This is something that Representative Maney, Judge Maney, has been working on for many years and makes a real change to the way that Florida will deal with its mental health and behavioral health crisis. There's lots in there that I'm not qualified to explain to you, so if you want someone to come explain it to you, we'll find someone that's an expert. But there's one thing in there that we asked for, and we worked very hard to get, and I want to say a special thanks to Angela Dwecky at Gray Robinson for helping with this. In the Baker Act, there was a language that, in essence, forbid cities, not counties, but cities, from paying for alternative transport for mental health patients that needed to go to a receiving facility. So under the Baker Act, the way this works is that counties come up with a transportation plan that say that once that law enforcement or somebody interacts with someone that may need to go to a receiving facility, a Baker Act facility, that the way they get there is, is the local law enforcement agency. And so this starts every interaction with someone having a behavioral health crisis with law enforcement, and only law enforcement. They would make the transport to the facility. That takes law enforcement officers off the streets, sometimes for a couple or 3 hours while they wait for the facility to take that individual in for assessment and treatment. So what this bill does is the Baker Act had allowed counties to pay for alternative transport systems. So they could hire a private provider that had mental health professionals to use something more akin to an ambulance as opposed to a police car to transport those individuals where law enforcement found that those individuals were not a threat to anybody. They were simply having a behavioral health crisis. Under this bill and a provision we got added, cities now have that option as well. Doesn't mean you have to, but now it's a policy option that you should discuss with your staff and make a decision about whether we want to do. It would require a change to the county's transportation plan, so we would have to work with the county to get that done. That has not been delivered to the governor yet. So in Tallahassee, we often, those of us in the process, often measure our success based not on what passed, but by what does not pass. And there were a number of key bills that failed this year that some of them could have had a real profound effect on the city. One of them, and this will happen sooner or later, but there has been a move over the years to hike the sovereign immunity caps from what they currently are for cities, from $200,000 per person or $300,000 per incident in a tort action against the city. That hasn't been raised in a few years, 10 or so years. There is an effort by a number of members to raise that. Some members would like to do away with sovereign immunity caps altogether, like some states do, and have no caps, so there would be unlimited liability to cities and counties. The more likely scenario is that we simply get a hike from, say, 200 and 300 to something like 400 and 600. But this year, that did not pass. There has been an effort over the years to do away with, eliminate the local business tax, which is one of our sources of our general revenue fund. Our levy each year, and you can get with Michelle to get this figure exactly right, is in the neighborhood of $10 million that goes into our general revenue fund. There are a number of members that have been trying to do away with that tax, just full stop. This year, this bill was moving this year. It was amended to say that it was amended so that you could keep the local business tax, but it was capped at the rate that you had this year. So it could never grow even as new businesses came into your city. That bill was defeated as well. Next, and this was one that we're just going to have to watch going forward because it would really have a profound impact on our general fund. And that is a series of bills that looks to cap or eliminate, depending on which one you look at, transfers of revenue or dividend payments from municipally owned utilities into general funds. There have been a number of bills that have tried to do this the last couple of years. We've had good discussions with one of the major bill sponsors that has watered this bill down. But there's this recurring theme amongst some legislators that there should not be revenue transfers from municipally owned utilities into the general fund of local governments. Other bills that died, there was a variety of bills that would have made certain adjustments, changes to the tourist development tax. None of those passed. There was also a proposal for a constitutional amendment that would have added an additional $25,000 exemption to the existing exemptions on homesteaded property. That also failed this time. So real quick, where we're at in terms of bills and where they're at in the process. A couple bills have been vetoed. Those were vetoed. That was the bill related to the use of social media by minors. Those were vetoed back during session. A compromise bill on that was signed into law by the governor later. The governor, as of this morning, has 23 bills on his desk, 105 bills waiting presentment, 183 bills have been signed into law, and none have been approved without signature. So finally, just a quick look ahead. There's an election this year, so there'll be new legislators coming in next year. Next year's session is on the regular dates of March and April, so we have a little extra time before next session. The incoming Speaker of the House has said that he has 3 priorities for next legislative session. The first priority is homeowners insurance. The second priority is homeowners insurance. And the third priority is homeowners insurance. So there's going to be a real focus on that next session after a lot of concern about that here in our state. The incoming Senate president has said he has 3 priorities. He comes from an agricultural background, so he'll focus in on that. Water quality, surface water quality, and the child dependency system. Other things that we have to look out for and be on guard for next year include things like local term limits. Counties almost had term limits imposed on them if they do not already have them. Some counties already do in their charter, but some don't. Those may be applied to municipalities at some point in the future. Again, the utility transfers by municipally owned utilities. I think you're going to see more discussion about homelessness in the next session. There will be a fight again about the local business tax and the communication services tax, both of which put money into our general revenue fund that we use to fund general government services such as police and fire. And next session, there will be the incoming chair of the House Ways and Means Committee has made it clear that there's going to be a deep discussion, a deep review of the tourist development tax. Everyone has a different opinion about how the tourist development tax should be spent and allocated. The incoming chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee has some strong opinions about it, so there will be a discussion about that in the next session. So with that, remember, I was just the messenger. And we're here to take any questions, or again, if you want some time, all of us on the lobbying team, happy to come spend more time with you in your office as well.
Any questions for Kyle? Mr. Stewart?
Kyle, real quickly, just back to the original building regulations. What types of permits were there, put the time clock on?
There are building permits for things like HVAC, electrical, plumbing, those sorts of things. There's a list of them in the bill. I can get those for you.
Yeah, but that's,
Yeah.
those are, I would say sub-permits, but they're permits of another building that come in.
That's right.
So,
That's right.
and as far as you know, where are we today on our responses?
When I said, we got a sneak peek at this bill before session, and we reviewed it amongst the economic development team. And this bill may cause some issues for smaller, less resourced governments. But we take great pride here in being as efficient, making sure that we enforce the building code for safety, first and foremost. But we believe that these timeframes are usually doable. In the event that there is an issue where a permit is just taking a little extra time, it is usually one of those things where our staff and the applicant just need to sit down and talk, and they talk it through. And but the two parties can always waive these timelines. But during our review, it seems that this is not going to be a major issue for us. Of course, we'd rather not have it demanded from Tallahassee, but probably not a big issue.
Did it address how we communicate to the constituent? No, so it's, I mean, we're good at communicating back, especially with email, but it didn't communicate how if we have to give a communication within a certain time frame, it didn't designate how we have to do that?
It does not in this bill, though in a bill from last year or the session before, there is now a rule that says that after so many denials of an application, the local government has to offer a meeting with the applicant, just sort of sit down and work it all out. That's something we do out of courtesy anyway.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Kyle.
Any more? Commissioner Ortiz?
Thank you, Mayor. I just got a quick question. Reference to the municipality or municipal utilities. Did they explain why was the reasoning behind not allowing transfers? I mean, it's not happening right now, but if this is to come next year, what was the reasoning behind that? What's their beef with that?
Depends on which one you ask, which one of the legislators that have run legislation like this. But there's sort of two arguments here, making their arguments for them. One is that utilities are sometimes supplied to residents outside of the city limits. Mm-hmm. And those folks are paying a surcharge or paying a utility fee that comes back to the municipality's general fund, but those individuals have no vote for the city council or the county commission. So they view it in their own minds as sort of like taxation without representation. Now, in the case of some utilities, those utilities have governing boards where some members of that governing board have to be non-city residents. So I think the counter argument to that is that it's not taxation without representation. There is representation on those boards of non-city residents, but that is part of it. The other part is there had been some cities, maybe you could say some bad actors in the past, that had simply transferred an imprudent amount of money out of their utility and into the general fund of a city budget, probably for what they thought were very good reasons, but left the utility financially in some,
Right.
yeah. And so you get one or two of those bad actors in a state, and everyone sort of gets hit with a hammer. And so that would be the other argument that you would hear from some of the sponsors of these bills.
Well, maybe then we can use municipalities that can offer a great example of how to do business and teaching the other ones on how to do business.
Yeah.
That's how we get things done.
And by the way, OUC does have one board member that has to be an OUC customer that does not live in the city of Orlando. So that's covered. Kyle, I do have one question on the preemption of using or requiring local living wage from people that do business with the city. Does it also preclude us from using that as a criteria for selection?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It does.
Okay. Okay, anybody else? Okay, good report. Thank you, team, who worked so hard for us in the course of the legislative session as well.
Thank you.
Okay, now we're going to have an update on our Be West policy. That's something that just kind of rolls off the tongue and stands for Building Energy and Water Efficiency Strategy, and that was adopted in 2016. So I guess every 8 years or so, we ought to have an update on some of the things that I think are good things and whether they're working or not.
Yeah, I think this has been a good thing. So thank you so much, Mayor, City Council, for letting us talk about Be West, the Building Energy and Water Efficiency Strategy here today. So Be West requires most of our city buildings and larger private buildings to report on their energy consumption every year. As Mayor said, it was adopted in 2016, but there were actually a couple years where we sort of worked up the requirements. So we've been receiving data from private buildings for a little over 5 years now. So it seemed like we've got a pretty good run of data, and it was a great time to update you all on Be West. So I'm actually going to introduce our speakers today. I think you all know me, Mike Hess, Director of Sustainability, Resilience, and Future Ready. I actually did not work for the city when Be West was passed back in 2016, but I vividly remember that day because I came here as a member of the public and filled out one of the forums and actually spoke in favor of Be West. So it's pretty exciting to see that it has, I think, been successful over the last 8 years. We also have Brittany Sellers here today. She is our staff person who was working for the city way back then. So we thought it fitting that Brittany really lead this presentation today. So Brittany, our assistant director, is going to lead most of the speaking here today. And also, I want to make sure everyone knows this. It is Brittany's birthday today. So we figured, what a great birthday present. Give her most of the work on her birthday here today. We also have Ashley Perez sitting right behind Brittany. So Ashley is one of our sustainability coordinators. She's been on board with the city for about a year now, thanks to you all for approving that position and letting us add in Ashley. She's really been leading the Be West efforts and has just done an amazing job at helping us implement this policy. So she's going to chime in for a little bit. And then we have a couple of our friends here as guest speakers to just talk about their thoughts on Be West and how excited they are about Be West. So we have Mr. Tron Nguyen, who is actually somebody I've known for 25 plus years from the engineering world. Tron used to be a facilities engineer at Disney, so he has a lot of experience, even though Disney's not in the city, doing energy benchmarking with Disney and using that to improve the performance of their facilities. And now, just recently, congratulations, Tron, he is now, as of a few months ago, the Director of Sustainability at Orlando Health. And we also have our friend Scott here from Advent Health, who's going to talk about some of their experiences with benchmarking. I realize this is very sort of healthcare leaning in our guests. We also had some multifamily and office building folks that have done a great job at reporting over the years. But unfortunately, at the last minute, the timing just didn't work out for some of them to join us as well. But I think Tron and Scott will give some great perspective. Also wanted to recognize we have Ashley Van Stone, who is one of our sustainability managers, who Ashley Perez reports up to. So that's Team Ashley, and the other Ashley really helps out a lot on Be West. And then also Dan McGarrigle, one of our sustainability associates, who is always willing to chip in and help with Be West. So the summary is, I think we have a really great team working on Be West, so I just want you to all be aware of that amazing team that we have. So all those folks are going to at least these folks are going to chime in, mainly Brittany. In the agenda we're going to roll through is a recap of the policy over the last handful of years, and just show you some of the data that we've seen as we've been collecting all of this energy efficiency data from both our city buildings and from private buildings. We're also going to talk about the impact that we've seen to date, which has been, I think, a good impact, and some of the takeaways from that. And then last but not least, we'll start to dive into, what, if there are any next steps we may want to take and how we may explore some of those additional opportunities. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to the birthday girl, Brittany Sellers, who is going to take the lead from here. Thank you, Brittany.
Thank you, Mike. And good morning, Mayor. Good morning, Council. I'd like to start off with some grounding regarding why we initially brought BOS forward and what the design of this particular policy was meant to accomplish. We've been so fortunate that since 2007, the GreenWorks Orlando program, which is now the Office of Sustainability, Resilience, and Future Ready, set by Mayor Dyer with the support of our City Council, has been working towards accomplishing some pretty ambitious climate and sustainability goals. Among those, reducing our carbon emissions by 90% in 2040. That's just 16 years away. We've been making excellent progress over the last more than a decade, working on strategies like BOS, but we still have our work cut out for us, and we know we need to continue to move forward quickly, continue to expand and accelerate our programs. And because buildings have such a unique ability to impact these carbon emissions, that's really where the focus of a lot of our efforts are. Reducing our overall consumption of our electricity, also focused on water, we know is a limited precious resource, transitioning our energy sources to renewable energy, as well as doubling down on some of our efforts as we look ahead and recognizing the climate emergency as the critical driver of action of our time that it is. So to go into a little bit more detail on the building piece of this, buildings represent the single largest opportunity for us to reduce our carbon emissions, improve public health, reduce air pollution of any other particular strategy or focus area of sustainability that we can address. We know that buildings on average can stand to reduce up to 30% of their overall electricity consumption just by addressing inefficiencies in the built environment. And in some cases, this can be even higher. Since buildings are a single largest representation of those sources of carbon emission across the community, this is really where we want to hone in our efforts and address those inefficiencies that in the long run can save money for both the property owners as well as the tenants in those spaces, and try to address and start with some of the largest buildings across the city of Orlando. And we chose this 50,000 square foot and above threshold specifically because it represents more than 50% of the square footage across the city, but it's only 4% the total number of buildings. So small number of buildings for an enormous potential impact. This is why we landed on this particular strategy, focus, a number of buildings. And really what we're asking these building owners to do is to step on the scale, to better understand how their building performs to similar building property types, those built in the same year with similar occupancy rates, and better hone in and address their particular energy efficiency opportunities that they can pursue for the benefit of, again, not only the tenants and the owners themselves, but the community at large. And some of these particular strategies, energy conservation measures, as they're often known, or ECMs, we know work because we've implemented them across our entire portfolio of buildings across the city of Orlando. We are one of the lead signatories of the Better Buildings Challenge, and now known as the Better Climate Challenge, with the Federal Department of Energy, and we've been leading with annual savings of more than 23% by initially starting with benchmarking, identifying our areas for improvement, and implementing measures that can save across the entire portfolio. We know City Hall is one of those spaces as well as our OPD headquarters, a number of our community centers, wastewater treatment plants, and beyond. If there is a building type that exists, chances are there's something pretty similar in our building portfolio. We've addressed them all, and we find that there are always savings that can be achieved regardless of the type of space that it might be, and even how old some of the buildings are. So looking at the community-wide implementation of the plan, we do know that it was passed in 2016. So what's happened in the last 8 years? I'm going to walk you through a little bit of a timeline here. So in 2017, our city-owned buildings started complying with the policy. Those are any city-owned building that are 10,000 square feet and above. Big difference from the community-wide requirement for 50,000 square feet and above. We know we want to lead by example, do what we're asking our private building owners to do, and do it to a faster and higher rate of stringency across the board. So most of those buildings were benchmarking even beforehand, but that's really where we started laying out the policy, as well as pulling together resources to help our building owners across the community begin to prepare to comply with the policy, to understand what's involved, what they needed to do. And that officially began in 2018 when we started receiving privately owned building submissions to the City of Orlando. We also continued a years-long training strategy that's still in effect with partners like USGBC and BOMA regarding educating on what is involved with benchmarking. These were free trainings that were available, usually with attendance around 30 or so folks, free lunch provided, where you could learn more about what's involved with the policy and what needs to be done. In 2019, we rolled out the transparency element of the policy. So a public report that goes on our website every year, displaying the compliance reports that we received from benchmarking, who all was complying, what their relative scores were, where those buildings stood, their size, and other details along those lines. And then in 2020, the last element of the policy, which is our audit requirement. This audit requirement is triggered by any building that scores, it's a 1 to 100 score, a 50 or below a 50. So on the lower half of overall average performance across similar space types, what they need to do is perform an audit once every 5 years. Both Duke and OUC provide a free commercial audit that is eligible for the policy. So do a free audit once every 5 years to find out what you can do to improve your building and get into that upper half of performance. So 2020 was the first trigger year for that. And then the next year in 2021, we provided a BWES impact report. At the time, it was the first 2 years of policy information that we had just to take a general snapshot of what we were seeing in terms of policy trends, what was our compliance rate, and what were some of the factors we were considering for future policy evaluation. So today is a little bit of a follow-up to that initial report. We also begun the procurement process for a software tool. We know that as one of the leading cities, we were in the first 20 cities to adopt a benchmarking ordinance. There was still a lot of learning in process. Other cities were looking at various tools that could be utilized to further automate the implementation process. So what our team is doing internally in terms of managing the data we're receiving, communicating with building owners and so on, there's some excellent tools on the market, and we began the procurement process for that, which we went live with this last year, as well as hiring our first full-time staff member, Ashley Perez, who we're going to hear from shortly, which has made an incredible difference in terms of not only improving the efficiency of our shop in terms of managing this policy with over 800 buildings, but also improving the customer service that we're providing to members of the public who need to comply with the policy. So we're so thankful for you all approving that in the budget. It's allowed us to continue to do a better job with the policy in terms of management and helping to reach our full potential with really what this policy can do for us. And then leading us to today with this update, and just looking ahead a little further into that 5-year window when the audit requirement will ultimately go into place for the first year of triggering. So those who triggered the audit in 2020 will need to provide their first update to us next year in terms of the audits that they've completed. So I want to make sure to not bury the lead with today's overview of the policy in terms of looking at what we've seen so far in terms of the data we've been receiving, who's been complying. We know that overall our greenhouse gas emissions, one of those key drivers of why we wanted to adopt this policy, have been going down. Whether we're looking at raw data, data that's been cleaned for our most efficient policy compliers, those with the fewest data errors, are across the board. We know that overall emissions are going down. The number of buildings who are complying are going up. The square footage in terms of those being complying is also going up, yet overall emissions are going down. This is what we were hoping to see. This is what we were seeing projected in some of the policy impact analysis done by GreenLink Analytics prior to adopting the policy. This is the trend that we're seeing. Those buildings that are complying are seeing reduced energy expenditures, electricity consumption, and of course resulting emissions the longer that they comply. We're making progress toward our goal, but again, we need to continue to stay on track and actually continue to accelerate a little further in order to meet some of the potentials that we saw projected through prior analyses. We also know that we need to continue to increase compliance over time and continue to get all those eligible buildings on board to do their part to continue to meet some of the sustainability goals that we have across the city, as well as things like tenant comfort and air quality as well. In terms of some of the specific statistics for this policy, I mentioned that the number of participating buildings has gone up. So looking from the first year of policy compliance in 2018 to 2023, we know that number is going up. In accordance with that, we're also seeing improved data quality. So the number of building owners who are submitting something to us in terms of their benchmarking as compared to those who are submitting fully satisfying criteria in terms of their data. They're not missing any data points. They're not missing a month's worth of utility bills. There aren't any errors regarding inconsistencies across the data. Is continuing to go up. So there are more people doing it, and they're continuing to do a better job with it. The average Energy Star score that we're seeing, again, is increasing, demonstrating more efficient buildings across the board, and emissions overall are going down. These are the trends that we want to see pretty much across the board here. And at this point, I'd like to call up Ashley Perez, our Energy Policy Coordinator, to provide a little bit more of a deep dive on 2 of our different building types. Ashley?
Thank you, Brittany, and good morning, Mayor and Council. So on this slide, as Brittany said, we have had several buildings that have been complying with this policy, but we wanted to highlight 2. The first being one of our office buildings, and here you can see their compliance status from 2019 on through 2024. We also have their Energy Star score. So this is something that the EPA uses to compare a building's energy efficiency, and it ranges from 1 through 100, as well as the site EUI, or the site energy use intensity. This takes into consideration the building size, as well as the full 12 months of energy data that's provided for this ordinance. One thing to note, and it's very exciting, any building that scores a 75 or higher, they're able to submit an application for an Energy Star certification. And at this point, the 2 buildings that we're going to talk about today, they have reached that point and they're able to apply for that Energy Star certification. This is our second, and this would be multifamily housing. Also, one of our properties that have been compliant since 2019 and has been able to pass that 75 mark to submit that application. And lastly, on my end, we are very, very excited for our BEAM implementation. So this is our software data management system. And just to give you full picture, before we implemented BEAM, this policy was based off of Excel sheets. And we now have a system that not only helps our building owners with their submissions, but it also helps us manage the policy. We have targeted weekly outreach every Tuesday that goes out to any building owner that submits their benchmarking data. It pinpoints any errors that were seen in their submission, as well as it lists any action items that they can take to fix that error. We also have an online ticket system, so if they have any questions, they can reach out directly. We can set up either a Teams call or a phone call, so we can do a one-on-one walkthrough for benchmarking their data. And exciting to note that if they need that assistance in Spanish, that is available as well. Now I will pass it back to Brittany. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ashley. All right, so I'd like to go ahead and highlight a few takeaways. What we've seen so far is that compliance has continued to increase. Nearly half of our total number of buildings required to do so are in fact submitting their benchmarking data. I would like to note that although we certainly have some room for growth in terms of our compliance rate, we are one of the only cities that does not have either a financial penalty for noncompliance or an ability to hold building permits for a certificate of occupation for noncompliance. So ours is a little gentle, I think, in terms of what we're seeing across other cities. Yet we've been working hard, and we're seeing that building owners are continuing to submit, something that I think we can continue to explore looking ahead. We've also seen this rate steadily increasing despite setbacks from COVID. So we know that was a disruptive time for everyone. We certainly saw shifts in the spaces where people were spending more time, for example, more time in multifamily apartment units as compared to office spaces. But across the board, we're still continuing to see those decreases overall. This software transition is also, as well as the addition of Ashley, has been really an incredible help for us to manage the policy. But we also know it takes some getting used to for everyone. So our data quality in terms of the submissions had an initial step back around 4% or so, but we're continuing to see a bit of a rebound from that as everyone gets adjusted to just doing something in a slightly new way. Ashley's regular correspondence has certainly been helping with that as well. Again, want to make sure to mention and underline that overall building performance is improving. The longer that we're seeing buildings benchmark, the better the performance over time, and the better that they seem to be doing, whether they have that energy use intensity score and Energy Star score, both. And we know that this remains a critical foundational strategy for what we're doing. Regardless of the direction that we may want to go, the different building policies that apply, there's a saying, you can't manage what you don't measure. Benchmarking is really foundational in terms of knowing your overall building performance, and other decisions and pathways can be taken from there. But really across the board, this is what we're seeing in other leading cities doing with further exploration, kind of starting from that point. And these aren't only our goals that we're looking to achieve here in the city, but as well as OUC's goals in terms of efficiency and their transition to renewables. Both of these factors work together. That's something that we've seen in their integrative resource plan. We know that we're looking to update that and kind of continue to drive forward with sustainable and clean energy and the efforts needed to get there. At this time, I'd like to go ahead and introduce Tron, who will come up and talk about some of his experiences with benchmarking. Tron, thank you.
Good morning, Mayor and Council.
Good morning.
Good morning. Happy birthday. Thank you for the opportunity for me to share my thoughts on the value of energy benchmarking. Right? As engineers, we always ask, what can we do more? How can we do better? Every time we finish a project or task, we're always trying to find ways to improve ourselves, help the community, our environment. So energy benchmarking saves energy. Yes, it helps hold us accountable. What we do, data, we love data. With energy benchmarking, we use the data to identify new energy conservation initiative, right? And then it's save energy, is reduce load on electrical infrastructure, something that people don't think about as we build business case, where you create energy initiative, you're saving the load of the building. And in doing so, you can do electrification, changing natural gas fryers to electric fryers, EV charging without adding or changing your infrastructure, right? The utility, OUC, the transformer, the size can stay the same. The feeders, the conduit from OUC can stay the same. Our incoming main electrical service can stay the same. And that helps with the business needs. A lot of time, the challenge is always about money. You want to do some initiative, and as owner, we think, well, what's the cost of this? What's the ROI? What's the IRR? So by identifying initiatives, we can help conserve energy and create spare capacity within our electrical or water infrastructure to add a couple of charges here, change some fryers without upgrading the whole entire system. And I think that's the benefit of benchmarking, help us identify that. So that's my thoughts on that.
I do have one question.
Yes.
So OUC's been studying for a long time and will be looking at implementing time of day usage.
Yep.
Are you working on that as well? It's probably tough in your business to,
Yes, so when we identify initiative, we have to look into that. And as benchmarking the meters, the trends, that's how we evaluate how much capacity we have within our facilities. Whether the hospital, parking garages, we use trends and data. And as I mentioned, we love data.
okay.
Yep.
Thanks.
Any other questions for that? Okay.
How much square, I'm just curious, how much square footage do you have underneath?
Orlando Health?
Yes.
On the facility size alone, the facilities is over 9 million square feet. So not including the hospitals. I don't have all the data. I'm still new at Orlando Health. But as far as facilities of the non-hospital is over 9 million square feet. Yeah, and a lot of opportunities.
That's great.
All right,
Thank you.
all right, thank you.
Thank you so much, Tron. All right, so looking ahead in terms of next steps, where do we go from here? We have a few goals that we've set for ourselves based on the data that we've seen so far. One, we know that we want to achieve a full compliance rate. We have we're about halfway there. We have more work to do, knowing that working with Ashley as well as Dan's help in terms of increased capacity in our office is going to allow us to do more outreach, continue to be in constant communication with those who are attempting to comply, as well as get new adopters on board, better manage the policy, understand where we are. The software automation is really helping us, again, to optimize that internal operations piece of it as well. And the better that we can do managing the policy, the more increased compliance that we can look to see over time. So that's our first central goal. The next piece, I mentioned the audit requirement, where we'll expect to see the first audit reports coming in next year. We want to make sure that there's a smooth transition to this final policy element that's coming into effect, to continue to weave in this requirement information with our regular communications, as well as make sure to highlight it in our outreach to those who are new adopters. So if you're a late benchmarker, you haven't yet complied with the policy, that you know what's required in terms of the benchmarking piece, as well as potentially the audit requirement if the score is below a 50. So get everybody up to speed as quickly and seamlessly as possible. And our final goal is to integrate more performance support. So for those buildings, we know we're seeing increased performance over time, but to help everybody take advantage of some of these possible strategies, provide more tailored information regarding how the building is performing in comparison to similar space types, what likely any energy conservation measures or actions can they take to have an improved score or overall energy consumption. What are the actions that they can take and what are the costs for those specific steps, and be able to provide overall snapshot scorecards like what you're seeing here, specifically to the building owners using our new software tool, Beam, which we think will be an excellent complement to some of the individual feedback that we've been providing, and just really help them visualize in what place what they can do and the steps that they can take, whether they're complying with the audit piece or they're a higher performer. There's always a chance to save a little bit more and improve their space. And with that, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to our next speaker, Scott, who's joining us from Advent Health. Thanks so much for being here, Scott.
Thank you, Brittany. Good morning,
morning.
Mayor and Council. Thank you for inviting me. This is a great opportunity to showcase what this wonderful team and what all our organizations are trying to accomplish. Earlier Brittany mentioned that we're only benchmarking 4% of the buildings in Orlando, which seems small, but when you look at Advent Health, we have maybe 10 properties in the city limits. And you're going to stump me on square footage, but within the city limits, I imagine we're probably around 6 million square feet. And then when we look at Central Florida Division, just outside of the city limits, we're in a 14 to 16 million square foot range. And I am proud to announce one of those buildings is Energy Star. So it's a goal. Without doing the benchmark, you have no clue where you stand. It's similar to a biometric test for a person. If you don't go through biometric testing, your health can get out of alignment pretty fast. And before you know it, you're struggling, you're taking medicines, you're doing stuff that Maybe you wouldn't have to if you took care of it yourself long term. So with benchmarking, looking at benchmarking yearly helps a building owner understand how that building's really performing. If you do it from day one, you understand how that building was designed and how it should run. And then following year after year really gives you a good idea of what it should be doing. The challenge, I think, well, of the 4% of the buildings that we're looking at, I don't think there's a mistake that two healthcare people are in here, because healthcare buildings use a lot of energy. Research and development uses a lot of energy. A lot of it's because of the safety and the need for safety within. There's a lot of air exchanges, a lot of airflow moving, a lot of conditioning required to keep people safe within. So we need to have an awareness of how to keep people safe. And that's first and foremost. Saving energy beyond that could put our patients at risk. Energy consumption from a benchmarking standpoint, a lot of times buildings are turned over without being optimized. So as you finish a new building, the contractors will make sure it works appropriately. But they don't really care how much energy it really uses. As long as we're all comfortable in here, they don't care if you're overcooling and turning the heat on to improve comfort level. And you're really, I guess the best term that we joked around from an engineering standpoint, it's like driving a car with your foot on the gas and the brake at the same time. If you're overcooling and heating just to make people comfortable. So by optimizing building performance, we can change that and still maintain the good comfort levels. And then from another benchmarking standpoint, your information is only as good as what you put in. So what I'd like to do is thank this team here. They've been an incredible resource, not only to Advent Health, but I'm sure to all other locations, where any question that we have, when we update information, they assure that they answer our questions, make sure we're benchmarking appropriately. That way we have a good value to go by. One other point I wanted to make was, you mentioned that from an Energy Star standpoint, achieving Energy Star, you need a rating of 75. So that's not a magical number. That's actually a moving target. As we all get better, you need to outperform 75% of your peers to get that rating. So as everyone moves up and increases their performance, you have to get better too. So, and to do so, again, we need to do so without putting our patients and clients at risk. So, thank you.
Commissioner Sheehan?
Thanks, Mayor. And something I just wanted to ask the hospitals about specifically is, I've been driving an EV for 2 years, and it's really been hard to find really good, reliable charging when I'm out and about. It's a low-mile EV because it was more affordable for me, but it only has 115 miles of range, and range anxiety is real unless you have a Tesla, because there's more charging available, and that's proprietary. So what I wanted to ask, and a lot of people I didn't even realize that was all proprietary until I bought the car and couldn't use a substantial charging network. So what I was wondering, if the hospitals could provide public EV charging as part of their mission, because hospitals are located so much regionally throughout the area, that would be a tremendous public benefit to the community because of the unavailability of public charging. And a lot of government buildings has it. That's where I've kind of relied as I've been out and about with government buildings. So it'd be great if the hospitals, some retailers are offering it, but I found it hasn't been as reliable. So I think y'all have the ability probably to maintain a more reliable system. That would be an asset I would have as an EV. That would be a public benefit use that you all could provide, and maybe as a as governments do it, as hospitals do it, as retailers do it, there might be more public adoption of charging, which is critically important to the adoption of EVs, because I just had to buy a gas vehicle because I got tired of not being able to go more than 50 miles. So, I hated to do it, but I thought the infrastructure would catch up, but it just really hasn't. And I love my EV, it's great. it's a wonderful, it's been great not to have to buy gas and everything like that, but it also is a, you know, it's been a really big constraint. So, something else that I wanted to ask was, and this might be more to the benchmarking. You said the longer they benchmark, the better their relative score is. Why is that? I mean, that's interesting to me. Once they get the score, are they implementing more energy efficient modes? I'm curious how that's working.
So we've kept these analysis at a really high level. Don't necessarily, unless one of the gentlemen today would like to speak to some of that, sure, and then I
Cool.
can kind of
Okay.
elaborate at a high level. Thanks, John.
So real quick, on the EV charging at Orlando Health, we have it throughout all the parking garages, EV charging, and usually they're up front towards the hospital, so it's a better parking spot. Yeah, it is available. Regarding the benchmarking, as we get better, when you design a building, they do a lot of assumption of the usage of the building, right? So there's a program called energy modeling where you're trying to simulate the actual usage of the building. And most often, there's always spare capacity. Scott mentioned that when people do the building, construct the building, install it, they don't think much about energy efficiency at all. So as time goes, as you see your trend, you see the opportunities, the usage of it, compare that, your hospital, your buildings with other buildings, and see the opportunity where you can create initiative. And as time goes, you get better and better. The more people use, you repurpose the building, less occupants, you know, there's changes around the building throughout the years. So as you fine tune and optimize the building, there's more opportunity to get even better on your energy benchmark.
Is there an opportunity to share those best practices?
Sure, these are initiatives we all of us have part of the organization where we publish our data and all the initiative opportunities, low-hanging fruits, things like LED changes, HVAC controls, things like that. Those are typical initiatives that we do.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. And just one more comment. You know, I'm living the dream. I have solar. I drive an electric car. I mean, I'm doing all the things. So, as a solar customer, you know, there was concern. I had a great deal of concern about the elimination of net metering. Basically, I get credit for the amount of power that I generate. And there's been a pushback to say, well, we're not going to pay you the retail rate. We don't want to have to pay you and compensate you for the power that you generate. The frustration for me is, you know, I made that investment in infrastructure, and now I'm being told I'm not going to be able to gain the benefit of providing that infrastructure. That I'm basically going to be given free power to this power company, which I don't think is fair. So I've been told that I'm not paying my fair share of the electrical grid and different things like that, but I think what we do need to understand is that solar customers are freeing up infrastructure. We're paying for that infrastructure. So I think it's a red herring to say that I'm a problem when I'm taking it off the grid and I'm providing that substantial investment, which, I mean, it's no secret, we don't make a whole lot of money up here, but this is something that I really believe in and something that I wanted to do. And I think that we need to provide more opportunities for people to be doing rooftop solar. I think it's critically important. I'm glad that we're doing it, but I also think there needs to be a fair return to someone once they make that investment to make sure that they can still afford to be able to do solar. That's just a comment that I had, Mayor. Thank you.
Understood.
Brittany.
Thank you. And to kind of follow up with the second half of your earlier question regarding what's driving action, trying to appreciate your example, I would say at large and what we're seeing, what the building science says, there are a number of publications on this. Information begets action. If it's the first time a building is comparing their overall, not their annual utility bills, which in and of themselves don't necessarily tell you a lot, but understanding how their building stacks up apples to apples of another office building of that type, built in the same year to the same code, for example, a house of worship that has similar, maybe unusual compared to other buildings, but operating hours when they see an influx of, tenants in the building or individuals who are part of the congregation in the building as compared to others where it's lying kind of dormant in between. That information provides a bit of a snapshot of how your building is doing. It might allow you to, one, engage in more behavioral changes and just see, hey, we're leaving the thermostat running a little cooler than we need to when no one's around. Those tenant actions certainly can't be understated, and building facility operators, tenants' actions can't be understated, but as well as exploring opportunities for improvement. That's really what we're seeing, upwards to 7% of just the information alone due to some of those behavioral changes. And then from there, you can seek out more improvements and recalibration through things like audits and retro commissioning if you're interested. But that's really what some of the publications from Building Science have showed us. And so, on that note, looking to some of our peers and what's available in the literature regarding opportunities for improvements, since we were an early adopter of benchmarking, we were the 19th city to adopt this type of a policy. We're also looking towards what some of our neighbors are doing in this space. I mentioned earlier that benchmarking is foundational. Any other choices that you want to make need to stem from the improvement of understanding how your building is doing to begin with. As a side note, Scott mentioned something earlier about the biometrics test, and that wasn't lost on me. Yes, today is my birthday, and one of the first texts I received was from my chiropractic care center wishing me a happy birthday. So I guess I am in fact getting older, but alignment is important. And so to that note, regarding understanding how buildings are doing, we've seen across the many dozens of other municipalities and even states that have benchmarking policies that they're looking to better understand how to raise the tide in terms of overall building performance. And they're looking to something called Building Performance Standards, or BPS. This looks a little different in every jurisdiction, but essentially it's a minimum performance requirement for those buildings. Many of those who are benchmarking are taking this voluntary action to do more and drive more. Some of them are not. This is a chance to improve overall electricity consumption, again, indoor comfort, outdoor air quality, and beyond by requiring an improvement of those spaces. To provide a comparison, this is a current map regarding any jurisdiction that has a benchmarking policy. So something like BWES, which we're talking about today, starting with those in green that have a standard baseline benchmarking only requirement, all the way to those in purple that have an action required, like an audit or a retro commissioning, requires actions taken for those lower performers. So this gives you a bit of a snapshot of where we are in terms of the sea of our peer municipalities and states. And you'll notice that several of those have also begun to explore building performance standards. So this is something we're seeing in some of the jurisdictions where they've had benchmarking for a while. The minimum requirements and thresholds look different in these various places, but some general trends we're seeing in terms of the next step, or the 2.0 of these benchmarking policies, is certainly a penalty. Like we mentioned, some of the cities that had a lighter penalty have gone back and revised those to require benchmarking, if not additional action, as well as lowering the overall size threshold. So 50,000 square feet was a pretty common baseline for a lot of the other cities. Many of them are looking to lower them as they get comfortable with managing the policy and are ready to take on more spaces and have a larger impact, because what they saw was working across those larger spaces. So that's one trend that we've seen. Another area that we've done some heavier exploration and engagement with is regarding energy equity. Several years ago, we engaged with GreenLink Analytics to provide a snapshot of what's referred to as energy burden. This is the amount that any individual or household spends of their monthly income on their utility bills specifically. So there are obviously two elements there in that calculation, but we know that energy inefficient housing is a huge driver of this. In this analysis with GreenLink, we found that Orlando's energy burdens are higher than the national average. We also found that there is a strong correlation between this inability to pay an affordable utility bill and our communities of color, both Black and Hispanic neighborhoods across the city of Orlando. We also found in our initial review of the building stock that much of this energy inefficient housing, in terms of the specific units, are in some of our smaller properties, not necessarily the 50,000 square feet and above. What this means for us going forward is to continue to look at things like this energy justice piece of our overall policy development. Many of the other municipalities that had a benchmarking ordinance have contributed to the document that's pictured there on the left regarding weaving in equity as a key piece of these types of programs and policies. There are best practices and understandings now that we maybe didn't have 5 or 10 years ago. By the same token, in terms of looking locally here, better understanding what our residents have to say, not just national trends, but what's really affecting those who live in Orlando, we've engaged with Poder Latinx, as well as NAACP and Grassroots Impact, to specifically do targeted outreach to some of the neighborhoods and zip codes that we found were the most energy burdened. So when we conducted that analysis, we found out where our energy bills were the least affordable, and we engaged with community partners to talk with those residents and better understand some of the struggles that they were facing and concerns that they had. We're also currently in pursuit of several different grant opportunities designed to continue to further this conversation with the residents, be able to provide opportunities for feedback, as well as exploring solutions. So small improvements that can be made, like more efficient window units in these individual units that can help to drive forward energy efficiency and lower utility bills today. So we're doing a few different things at once, but the commonality across the board is listening to our residents, continuing to engage, and trying to better understand and explore solutions so that we know we can address inefficiencies in our existing building stock, consider tenant protections for overall affordable housing that includes rent or mortgage and the cost of utilities together, so one doesn't go up and the other goes down or vice versa, as well as considering that size threshold that I mentioned about where some of these inefficiencies are taking place and how we can best address them. So to recap, I've shared a few different ideas today. The first point that we want to consider going and looking ahead is regarding the enforcement of our policy. We don't have a stringent policy, or a penalty rather, for non-compliance. That's something we can explore going forward to be more on board with some of our other peer cities. Looking at the scope of the policy, both the building size covered as well as exemptions for particular policies. You know, Commissioner Gray, that's something that you've shared with us before as a potential area of interest, are the particular buildings that are exempt versus those that are included in the policy. That's something we're keeping an eye on and want to continue to explore. We also would like to encourage the building water requirement. Currently, energy benchmarking is required. Water reporting is not. It's considered optional. I will say that the majority of the building owners who are complying with the policy do include that information. I think that's a benefit of OUC providing all of that data together. But given what we know about the consumptive use permit, strains that we saw during the pandemic, the more that we can do in terms of preserving water, the better it is for the entire community. And those benchmarking benefits I mentioned with energy often apply to the water space as well. In terms of looking ahead in future considerations, I mentioned the building performance standards, as well as other policies. We're looking ahead to see what peer cities are doing, how they're working, what the impacts are, potential consequences, just something that we're keeping on our radar, as well as considering equity and everything that we do going forward and understanding better how that particular perspective can be woven into what we do in the building space. In terms of our recommendations of what we'd like to do going forward, this works in tandem with those goals I mentioned earlier. We want to perform additional research and stakeholder engagement, continue to listen to our community members, get diverse speakers and voices at the table, and understand what we can do to meet their very real day-to-day needs. We would like to follow up again with a similar update to what I'm providing today, and provide information about what we've heard in some of those listening sessions and outreach. What are we hearing from the community could be a positive solution towards meeting some of their needs, whether it's energy affordability, meeting our community-wide sustainability goals or beyond, and then also provide additional briefings on what else we're doing in the energy space. I keep mentioning that benchmarking is foundational, efficiency first, it's our first fuel, if you will. The cheapest, cleanest kilowatt hour is the one you never have to use, but we know we're doing a lot in terms of the renewable energy space, and also some targeted work that Ashley Van Stone, our energy project manager, has been leading regarding this energy burden work. So we have more to come on those, and we'll be providing targeted conversations around some of those strategies. And with that, I'll go ahead and conclude and open it up for questions.
Turns out there are a few questions. Commissioner Ortiz, then Burns, then Sheehan.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Brittany, Mike, Ashley, Mr. Hune, and Mr. Suckins. That was a great presentation. I appreciate it. I'm going to start from your letters. latest comments on energy burden in Orlando. The second line says there's a strong correlation between energy burden and racial demographics. Is this because of lack of disseminated information, understanding, or financial status?
We could both speak to that probably, but Mike, I've been
Yeah,
talking.
well, if you'd like to go, it is your birthday, so I will defer if you would
No, please.
so choose. I mean, I think it's actually all of those, but we're still sort of wrapping up the research phase on that. We've spent a lot of time over the past year talking with a lot of our community partners and working with them like NAACP and Put Air Latinx. But we've actually been doing a lot of one-on-one interviews with residents with lived experience in this space, and so we're learning a lot. Ashley over here has actually been sort of drafting a report to summarize all the reasons behind that. So I think that if you want, I could probably bring up the draft and we could spend another 2 hours, but I don't know if you have that time right
I
now.
was
But I think we'll
thinking
have a separate briefing on that as
Maybe
we
we
wrap it up.
can start some sort of campaign, and we can visit the main street. I mean, we can visit neighborhoods,
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. That's
associations, and all that.
yeah, one recurring theme is there are tons of different programs out there from tons of different organizations, including some great programs from OUC, but a lot of people just aren't aware of all the things that are sort of happening at once. So how can we as a city help pull some of those resources together?
Maybe we should start a campaign saying how we can save you X amount of dollars, out of your pocket. Because I know when it's hitting people's pockets, people pay attention. So that's one. The other question I have is, I see where we want to be, but and I hear a lot about benchmarking. But where are we? If we were to translate the numbers of the policy performance view to percentages, what kind of drop in greenhouse gas we claim, transition to renewable energy, energy consumption today, if we were to tell how much have we done so far, do we have some numbers on that?
So the overall average that we found from our calculations in terms of the policy impacts that we were anticipating is about 16%, and that was through 2030. So if you line up our overall performance, we do need to accelerate a little bit further, but we're pretty much in alignment with what we were hoping to see at this point in policy implementation. We know that there's an increase over time, so we see improved dividends, if you will, the further along in the policy we
So on
are.
emission of gases, we have dropped,
Over 150,000
which translates
metric
to the,
tons of CO2.
because we have to, by 2040, the mayor's goal is to drop 90%. So right now, we are at what percentage of dropping this? 23? Yes, thank you.
Our overall, I don't have a hard statistic for that off the
Okay.
top of my head. I would like to refer to the numbers. But I will say one thing that we have seen a shift in our overall greenhouse gas accounting is that the per capita reductions have gone down significantly. So despite our overall growth, the relative number of emissions has either held steady or decreased year over year, which is the trend that we want to see. I'd be happy to follow up with more
Is this-
specific calculations.
Is this something we can pinpoint? Is this something we can get, this information? Maybe we can get to it. The reason I ask you this is because I think when we go to the neighborhoods and we explain this, people are not too keen in waiting for that or analysis or stuff like that. They like to go straight to the point. So if we can tell them, hey, listen, this started back in 2018 and we're ready at this point. And the same thing with renewable energy and consumption. That's going to motivate people to continue doing what we're doing. So.
Absolutely. And I think your point is well taken regarding, we have an ecosystem of policies regarding energy. This efficiency piece is part, but certainly transitioning to renewable energy is incredibly impactful. So being able to provide, hey, we're doing these different things in this suite of options, and this is the progress we're seeing. Just like at home, switching out one light bulb isn't going to make or break your utility bill, but doing a number of different changes can. I think that would be great. So thank you, and happy to
kindly.
follow
I
up.
appreciate it. Thank you.
Commissioner Burns?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Mike and Brittany, for a great presentation. Brittany, my question is along the lines of Commissioner Ortiz regarding the energy burden of Orlandians. So you mentioned that Orlando residents experience an energy burden of 130% higher than the national average. Do we know why that's the case, and what are the contributing factors to that. And I know the correlation between the racial demographics and that energy burden, but I just want to know why in general, or have we identified those reasonings?
Thank you for your question, Commissioner Burns. I think there are likely a number of different factors, but since it is a two-part equation that takes into account both income and utility expenditures, we know that we see lower income rates in some of those particular census tracts, so there's likely a strong connection with that as well. From what we've done in terms of outreach, and want to make sure to mention we will have a targeted session where we can really dive into all the details with this, we are finding that there are opportunities for education as well as access to existing rebates and incentives, for example, opportunities for conservation at home. So we think there's a lot to be done in those spaces, but I do want to be mindful, locally some of our utility rates are lower than a lot of the national averages that we're seeing, but unfortunately we also have a number of residents who are lower income in the city, and unfortunately there are some correlations with racial demographics in those spaces as well, as well as the inefficient housing that they may be living in.
Right. Okay, and I think that's a key point, especially as we're talking about the some of the increases in the stormwater rates and some of feedback that I've received. I think we may need to have a concerted effort to get some of our residents connected with a lot of the city resources and opportunities to maybe reduce the financial impact on them in other areas while we're looking to increase that stormwater rate. So now I think one of the things that I've seen, we have a lot of great programs within the city, but it's about getting the word out, but then also getting our residents to take advantage of those resources. And sometimes they need a little hand-holding to do so. So thank you.
Yeah, and I know you're about to go into agenda review as well. You'll actually see one of the items under the mayor is a grant application for the Energy Efficiency Conservation Block Grant. It's actually the terms and conditions. We didn't win the grant yet, but because it's formula funded, there's probably like a 95% chance we're going to win it. And so you probably noticed on City Council agenda, we're proposing to use that to actually create some new energy efficiency programs to address some of the energy burden issues. So just a heads up, you'll be voting on that in just a couple hours.
Great, thank you.
Commissioner Sheehan?
Thank you, Mayor. And I think something that we did that was really interesting several years ago was we compared energy efficiencies by neighborhoods, and I thought that the 1920s houses that were built, the historic homes, would do the worst. And it was very interesting. The ones that did the worst in my district was, now it's yours, Commissioner, I'm not going to call you out, but it's Coy Town, because it was concrete block, flat roofs, and no insulation. And that ended up doing the worst on the energy efficiency, and that's a lot of the housing that's built on the west side is concrete block. They didn't do any insulation. And, that was a lot of that building style that's caused a lot of this problem. And also, with the equity focus, you've got duplexes, smaller investment units that people have bought, and it's all this kind of construction. And there are window units, but they probably haven't been upgraded in a long time, so it might be a good idea to maybe to work on, instead of just doing studies with some of the money that we get, to actually provide window units to people. We provide smoke detectors, we do all kinds of things. Why can't we provide some of these window units? Another thing that's really been a burden to folks is when, in some of these older units, when a water leak occurs, that gets passed on to that tenant, and they don't know about it till it's hundreds of dollars. So if there is a way to figure out, working with OUC, if there is a water leak at a residence, where we can go out and deal with that before it passes on a substantial burden to a resident, that would also be very, very helpful. And another thing impacting, some of the low income folks, which is awful, is the danger of using space heaters and we hear about home fires and all that happening whenever there's a cold snap. They don't have heat, and so they're using space heaters, or they're using kerosene or something like that, and it's very dangerous, and we're seeing that kind of a thing happen. So I think heat danger anything causing by heat, even the proper use we even need to do as part of our outreach, I think, is in terms of public safety too, is not overloading. I've seen fires happen in my district, overloading an extension cord, something that simple, but then I've seen it impact people in my district where someone plugs in an electric heater, again, a heating blanket into a regular extension cord. it put 6 households out of a building because that fire impacted that whole building and it impacted 6 households. So again, these are minor educational things that we can do. That's also, it's safety and energy efficiency, and we can really help people by even doing minor education, because just that extension cord would have, had a tremendous impact on a lot of people who lived in not low income, but lower income housing. So that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you for your
Commissioner Fisher
feedback.
Stewart.
Thank you, Mayor. When we started this whole process, it seems to me that the goal wasn't only just to reduce energy, it was also provide a kind of a map for reducing expenses in some of these buildings. The idea being that when we go to large buildings, we want you to comply because, in a sense, in complying, not only are you doing good for our consumption in air, but we're also saving you money. Have we done some type of comparison between the cost efficiency, dollars and cents, so we can turn back to some of these major buildings and say, look, here's the example of these 65 buildings, and here's why it's good for you. And I understand the penalty side, but there's also the carrot side.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that I think we're going to be able to most effectively provide through those building scorecards. I showed a demonstration of what that could look like. Individually, when you're going through benchmarking a building in Energy Star and it's providing this relative score, you're getting some information. We certainly encourage and highlight in any of our outreach materials or just regular communications going to OUC or Duke if you have questions, because their incentives are designed to meet some of these usual culprits for lower performance across the spaces. But I think a combined approach with the building scorecards as well as the audit requirement is really going to give them that specific actionable dollars and cents savings that they can look to see. There are a lot of average per square foot improvement, return on investment figures that we could cite, but really if they want to take action and get a sense of what that's going to look like on their own bills and their overall operating expenses, we want to give them as specific information as possible.
Well, and I guess, and not all businesses can do it, but Scott and Tran, thank you. Their organizations have said, we're going to put people in a spot that helps us save money. Mm-hmm. And we're going to justify that by having the money you save that's how we're going to justify your salary, essentially. Mm-hmm. So they're trying to fix their energy costs as best they can and doing that through better efficiency, and that gets translated back to their own staffing, essentially. That's hard to do in a lot of the buildings that we have, but it seems to me that is kind of a little bit of a threshold of providing either some anecdotal information or some specific information about the organizations that are making this efficient. I mean, the idea of putting in solar at a location does a whole lot for all the metrics, but it also makes it safe. It makes it cheaper. Right. So therefore, there's an energy cost that they get a chance to not enjoy energy expense they don't enjoy. So
right.
I think that's how it's always kind of those carrot and the stick, and this is the carrot is, hey, this is really going to be efficient.
Yeah, definitely. It's certainly something we've done across our city portfolio in terms of overall planning, and why we've referred to it as a revolving energy loan fund that our energy management team and facilities has done, is planning based on the savings we can expect to receive, not just to be recouped, but reallocated to other city programs that we're no longer spending on unnecessarily high utility bills. So it's something we encourage, but would certainly, I'd love to seek additional outreach and provide more case studies that we can. Although again, thank you.
Apparently I made Scott excited. Yeah, Scott, wants to chime in. Come on, Scott, I got Scott all excited. I'm sorry I didn't ask that question.
No, I walked off too quickly. Your question's extremely interesting and very, very hard to answer. A metric that they look at is energy utilization index. That's a blend of all your energy. So are you using more gas, natural gas? Are you using more electricity? So you have to kind of figure out where your best bang for the buck is. For one of our properties I mentioned, we achieved Energy Star. We lowered that EUI, Energy Utilization Index, by about 50 points. That saved us about $120,000 a year. So that's a pretty significant savings. It will pay for a lot of salaries for that extent. So if you multiply that over all your properties and then continue what you learn, you can achieve big things. So, and two things that I wanted to touch on that, one, I was fortunate to go to Denmark on a sustainability mission trip a year and a half ago. One thing that stuck with me on that trip was when we met the mayor of Copenhagen, she said that she was being shamed by her kids, meaning she has all these great initiatives. They're the most sustainable city in the world, but she's doing things wrong, and it's because her kids are learning at a young age how to do it better. That's how we have to improve. We can spend a lot of money on new air conditioning units, on all this stuff, but if we don't maintain it right and operate it right, then we don't succeed. So like at a hospital level, we can take old equipment, clean it, get it to operate as new and save a lot of money. Then if we replace it, maybe we save more, maybe we don't. But we could put new equipment in today, and in a month, it could operate just as poorly as something we had for 40 years. So education's key. I think educating from the ground up. It will be programs that will help every low-income area out there, because if they learn how to change the filter in their AC unit or their central air conditioning unit, clean their coils, stuff that even facility people in our organizations fail on every day. To do the right things from the ground up, I think we'll see the big difference. Invest in our population, then invest in the infrastructure. So.
Thank you.
All right, that was a great close. So thank you, Mike, Brittany, Ashley, Tran, and Scott for a great presentation. That will conclude our workshop. And we will go right into agenda review. Madam Clerk, do we have any speakers for agenda review?
No speakers, Mayor.
Commissioner Gray, you're first up.
Thank you, Mayor. On the agenda, I want to declare a conflict on item C11, C12, and the companion item CRA number 4, all associated with travel and leisure incentive agreements. So I'll abstain from voting, and I filed the paperwork with the clerk.
So show Commissioner Gray not voting on those items when they come up. Commissioner Ortiz.
I don't have anything. I'd like to see Corey Knight later on.
Commissioner Stewart.
A couple of quick things. Mayor, we had a presentation, not presentation, but I guess probably a discussion last Wednesday about the stormwater. I'd love to hear from Corey about that maybe at the...
We're going to have Corey do a presentation.
Because I think we had some good comments and feedback. I think it's a good idea. Also, there's an item on B17. I'll share some comments. I'll leave it on the consent agenda, but I'll share some comments about that at the city council meeting. So,
okay, thank you, Commissioner Sheehan.
I met with staff. I have nothing, Mayor.
Commissioner Burns.
Mayor, I met with staff and I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, then we'll stand adjourned. We'll convene at 2 o'clock for a regularly scheduled meeting.